Hi, thanks for joining me. Welcome back to the channel. So today is I'm going to be talking about another one of these amazing Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary releases, and as you can see here, it's of a self-titled Genesis album released in 1983. Now, I've done many a video on Genesis before now, and regular viewers will know that, you know, as a 16-year-old, Genesis was my number one favourite band and have remained a favourite band throughout the course of my life, without a doubt. But I was very much definitely a Peter Gabriel era Genesis fan, more so than a Phil Collins era Genesis fan. That said, I think Trick of the Tail is an astonishing album, one of their absolute best. Wind and Wuthering, and Then There Were Three, and Duke, I think are all quite underrated. And this album here, I mean, I'll have to tell you the story of basically back in the day, and I'll, you know, for that I shall just refer to this original. So this album I did buy on the day of release back in 1983. It's no great surprise, but as I said, by then I was, you know, Genesis were my number one favourite band. The only thing is that by this point in time we'd had Abacab, which I really didn't particularly rate. I mean, not at all. I think, you know, Duke was still sort of hanging on the coattails of the earlier, you know, a prog band, Genesis. Abacab was fast becoming a pop act, and I think the thing that really made this for me was the first single was Mama, which, you know, listening to on Top of the Pops or over the radio, you know, it had that sort of gated reverb drum sound which Collins had first used on Peter Gabriel's third album. And, you know, it was kind of, it was the sound of the 80s, really. It was very impressive. And this album is very much a product of the 80s for me. Now, so at the time of release, I would have bought it. And I mean, looking at the track listing on here, we've got side one, Mama, which I just thought was amazing at the time. That's All, which I thought was pretty okay. Home by the Sea, and then Second Home by the Sea, I thought they were pretty amazing. You know, this is Genesis. I mean, you know, I was very kind of bowled over in first impressions, but let's say Genesis at its best. I mean, clearly, I don't think that anymore. Side two, to be perfectly honest, even at the time, I kind of was, well, you know, side one's the killer. Side two's a bit not so great. And when this was announced that it was coming out on Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary series, it was one of the ones that I thought, oh, shall I or shan't I? And at the end of the day, I thought, well, I so loved side one of the original album back at the time that I thought, yeah, let's do it, because to hear Mama and Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea particularly, you know, let's hope the best I've ever heard them, would make it worthwhile for me. So I bought it, and you know, let me just show you here. So on the original, the inner sleeve, in fact I'll show you with the original. On the original, the inner sleeve has the lyrics, and, you know, that's it, okay? On the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th, it's a gatefold, very nice gatefold, with the lyrics in here and the credits. Credits are down here. Okay, so at the time of release, this was the best-selling Genesis album ever. So from a Genesis's perspective, this was the most successful thing they'd done, and this is where, you know, they'd made it big, and all the rest of it. And certainly, you know, Mama, the single, or the first single, was mind-blowingly impressive to hear on the radio. And it's kind of that radio sound of the 80s. So how does it stack up to the audiophile treatment? And it's a very interesting one. I mean, this new version, it's cut by Chris Bellman at Bernie Grumman Mastering. Chris Bellman is kind of, I would say, the progmeister of the world's sort of leading mastering engineers. And so if anyone was going to do a good job, I would say it's going to be him. But now, anyway, I'm going to just talk about this. Let's start off. I'm going to talk about Mama. And I'll talk about it, first of all, on my original, because I haven't played this album for quite a few years. And that's talking about side 1. Side 2, I'd be surprised if I've played it for 20 years, frankly. And the system I had in 1983 was, I would say it was a proper hi-fi system, but it was very much a low-end hi-fi system. And I think this is very much produced, cut, mixed to sound good over AM radio and basically your lo-fi kind of, so it's a lo-fi production, if you like. Everything's extremely sort of compressed. And by that, quite interestingly, I always kind of measure using a sound pressure level meter to sort of balance the volumes between these things. And on Mama, for instance, which if you think about it, it sort of starts off with those kind of very spooky kind of keyboard layers. And then you've got this sort of, that's one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the sort of, absolutely howling, wailing vocal from Collins. And I've got to say, I think this is one of Collins's best vocal performances. It's the most Gabriel-esque. It's got the most grit and angst and anguish and power in it. On quite a few songs on this record. There are quite a few songs on it which I just, no, not for me at all. But Mama, I certainly think is one where Collins's vocal is quite awesome. And you've got those, that amazing sort of, it's a gated reverb. Gated reverb is the effect that they've applied to the drums, which is that sort of, thing, which Collins actually used on his drums on Peter Gabriel 3, which had been a few years before this. And I think that this sound had been kind of, whether it was Collins, Gabriel, or the engineer, or a combination of all of them that kind of came up with this sound. It became, very much a sort of a hallmark drum sound of the 80s almost. That and the electronic sort of drums. And that's another thing about this album. Particularly with Mama, for instance, we're starting off and it's a Linn drum, which is an electronic drum machine. So, this is the irony of this album. You got one of, in my opinion at the time, the world's greatest drummers, and you're using a bloody drum machine, So yes, it's all very sort of, snappy and punchy in the, but it's not, it is synthetic. It sounds synthetic because it is synthetic, and whilst the sort of the gated reverb effect is all very nice. Collins does pick up the drums towards the end of the song and play proper drums, although I'm not even entirely certain they're proper drums. I think it's a Simmons electronic drum kit. But it's impressive. Now, playing this on the original, bearing in mind I haven't played it for many years, frankly, and the last time would have been on a sort of a medium-fi system, and initially would have been on a very much a lo-fi system. I'd been a student at the time, and my entire system would probably have cost £300 or something like that. It was hi-fi, but it was student level hi-fi, and that's it. So when you play this on a big system, it does sound really quite processed, very compressed. you know, there's loads and loads and loads of keyboard layers, and that's, you know, being a Genesis fan, being a particular fan of Tony Banks, or Anthony Banks, as he's billed on here, you do appreciate all those sort of, you know, those keyboard layers, and it's nice. And there's a little bit of guitar somewhere in that mix, which Rutherford's playing, but actually, I think playing this original, the thing that actually comes across the nicest all the way through the whole album, for that matter, is the bass. And it's, you know, hats off to Rutherford, because, you know, it actually sounds quite nice, and it sort of, I think, almost drives the album. Whether that's because you haven't really got Collins, you've got a bloody drum machine for most of the album, or when you have got Collins, he's playing electronic drums. It's not, you know, it's not Apocalypse in 9/8 or anything like that. This is far, far, far from prog rock at its best. But it's, you know, it's okay. It's okay. It's kind of quite good fun to hear them. But it's, you know, vocal, I'd say this album generally, you've got Rutherford puts in a pretty good performance on the bass. The drums are, you know, they're very 80s. It's punchy and impressive in an electronic synthetic kind of way, because it is electronic and synthetic. And Collins's vocal it's definitely impassioned, and he's you know, he's wailing and giving it some. And in that respect, I think it's one of his best performances. But the whole thing, in a hi-fi context, it doesn't sound very good. Think thin, hollow, just sort of compressed. But the bass sounds quite nice. Okay, a little bit one-notey at times, but the bass does actually sound quite nice. Now then, if we get to the Atlantic 75th anniversary pressing, does it sound better? Yes, I would say in 95% of the ways it does. It sounds, you know, this sounds bigger, more luscious, more layering of the keyboards. The drums do sound better. I mean, they really do sound an awful lot better. Where there are guitars in the mix, they're picked out better. I will say, you know, as I said, this is probably 95% of ways this is better. I think you could almost say 50% of that is Collins's vocal, because it is a great vocal performance on this record. And on all of the tracks, his vocal is richer, fuller, more colourful, more expressive. It's way, way, way better. And that really, really, really adds. As I say, the drums, you know, I would say they sound more real, but they're, you know, in a lot of cases they're not real. Well, that's it. You know, that's if you think of a drum machine or an electronic kit as real or not. You know what I mean? The keyboards are more lush and more layered, and that's really, really, really welcome. The only thing that I would say I'm not so convinced about this is the original, going back to that original, okay, whereas this one sounds much wider, much more open, much more spacious, and this one sounds more kind of like dense, more kind of compressed, and just this smaller thing between the speakers. And like I said, the only thing that sounds even vaguely good about it, the original, is the bass, because it sort of just, you know, it's a bit one-notey, but it just sort of pumps and thumps. And where it's sort of the bass is in time with like a kick drum hit, for instance, you know, the kick drums on this don't really have any weight behind them or depth. So it all the way along the line, it's kind of like that bass is the most prominent thing that you hear. And in so doing, it kind of bounces along with the song. And that's, you know, it's what I've known for 40 years. I mean, let's not forget, it's what I've known but didn't particularly like this album much for 40 years. On this one, the bass is I would say it's clearer. It's got a better sort of pitch, definition to it, but it's not quite as loud. And I think they've sort of, they've decompressed the sound slightly, and in so doing, it's sort of, it's lost a little bit of its weight. But with that, you've got, on the sort of every fourth bass note, whatever, you've got a kick drum sort of thump, which you actually hear beneath the bass on this one, which you didn't really pick up on the original. So it's it swings, and the bass, and this is only the bass, I would say it swings in roundabouts. I mean, on Home by the Sea, for instance. Now, Home by the Sea I had in my memory of, like, maybe, as I say, 10, 20 years ago when I last played it. I had in my head that the songs on this album that were really good were Mama, Home by the Sea, and Second Home by the Sea. Now, it's sort of Second Home by the Sea. You've got this big sort of almost church organ-y kind of, there's lots of keyboard, lots of layers, and lots of bass, sort of, dense sort of thing going on. And because it's a bit more compressed on this, it has a bit more of that density, whereas on here it is more spacious, but in a way it's less compressed. And less compressed doesn't always equal sounds better. Okay, Collins is absolutely on Collins is absolutely on fire as a vocalist, but my God, I wish he'd get back behind his drum kit and throw those bloody drum machines out the window. But there we go, that's what they chose to do at the time. Okay, so does this sound better than the original? Yes, with that slight caveat about the bass and the fact that this, whilst it's all more compressed and in one lump, does have a pleasing 80s compressed in one lump drama to it, okay? But this is, tonally, the expression, the colour, the richness, the body, and it's not just of Collins's voice, it is of those, drums, whether synthetic or not. The guitars you can hear buried in the mix much more clearly. All those keyboard layers are more luscious and more separate. It wins hands down on every count. It's just, sadly, it always has been, and it still is not my favourite Genesis album. Okay, so on that note, I will say thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now. Bye.